this is uncharted territory for the Democrats. We've said this ever since Donald Trump got elected, but they keep pointing to the economy is better off than people think it is. They keep pointing to the legislative accomplishments of the president. They keep saying people like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, says he's our guy. Everybody line up behind him. But we've never had a we've never had a president this old, much less one seeking re-election who's an octogenarian, and he does not deliver the message well. He doesn't communicate well for an 80-year-old, quite frankly, and that's why this is different. I mean, people have to have confidence that he can do the job, and they believe that. Listen, he would take the he would enter a second term at the age of 82, and they believe simply you can't run away from being that old.
Over in the U.S., well, we're hearing that Donald Trump holds a commanding double-digit lead over President Biden before next year's election. That's according to a new poll. The ABC News Washington Post poll put Trump, the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, 10 points ahead of Biden, and the numbers would suggest a clear win for the former president rather than a repeat of 2020, when the result was much closer. Conan Nolan, political correspondent for NBC, joins us now. And Conan, good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
The pleasure's all mine. Good evening.
Always good to speak to you and get in depth into what's going on in the US election race. Now, I suppose just remind people, Conan, the result in 2020 was rather close. And how much of a surprise is it that there's a 10-point lead already?
Well, it's a big shock to Democrats. Now they're looking at other polls, which are better for the president, but not that much better. The ABC Washington Post poll is the one you're referring to that has Donald Trump out ahead. The NBC poll out at the same time has them neck and neck, but that doesn't make them feel all that much better. So there's a real concern, and in those polls, there are other questions that really have them concerned, and that fundamentally is that most Americans believe they're worse off economically as a result of the Biden presidency, and they believe that Donald Trump did a better job with the economy. That is a fundamental issue, and it's usually when you have negative numbers like that as an incumbent, it usually leads to very bad things on election day.
Oh, I see. So that poll found that 44% of Americans feel they are worse off financially under this administration. You just wonder with these polls, though, because we've been through COVID, if most people generally anywhere in the Western world, they feel that they are worse off after the last few years. But you talked about a big shock. Does that mean the Democrats will do anything about it?
Well, no, it doesn't. The time is running out. The first ballots will be cast in January, and in the state of Iowa, in South Carolina, soon after January. January is for the Republicans, but early next year will be the first ballots in the first Democratic primary, and so by Thanksgiving, that pretty much. That is the end of November here in the U.S. That pretty much locks it up. If you're going to have a Democratic candidate to run against Joe Biden, it would have to happen by then. And it probably won't happen unless Joe Biden changes his mind. Okay. And that somebody tells him, listen, you did a great thing for the party and a great thing for the country, but you need to move aside now. If he doesn't come up with it on his own, it's highly unlikely any Democrat would challenge him for the nomination.
Okay, so 9 weeks then until Thanksgiving. Will Joe Biden? Is there any chance of Biden going? You know what? I'm not up for it.
It's unlikely. I can't say that there's a possibility because there's always a health issue with somebody who is 80, nearly 81 years old. But I have to tell you. This is uncharted territory for the Democrats. We've said this ever since Donald Trump got elected, but they keep pointing to the economy is better off than people think it is. They keep pointing to the legislative accomplishments of the president. They keep saying people like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, says he's our guy. Everybody line up behind him. But we've never had a president this old, much less one seeking re-election who's an octogenarian, and he does not deliver the message well. He doesn't communicate well for an 80-year-old, quite frankly, and that's why. This is different. I mean, people have to have confidence that he can do the job, and they believe that. Listen, he would take he would enter a second term at the age of 82,
Mm.
and they believe simply you can't run away from being that old.
How much has Biden's cognitive functions, how much have they decreased visibly over the last couple of years?
Well, they start to add up. Even CNN has a fact check page where they will go over things he said that are fundamentally not true, which are frequently stories, such as "I was there the day after 9/11 at the World Trade
Oh,
Center."
I
No, he
saw.
wasn't.
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
he wasn't there. He tells a story, and he's told it several times, about a conductor on an Amtrak train talking to him about how many times he traveled, how many miles he traveled on Amtrak as opposed to Air Force One. And he names the person. Turns out that person had passed long before Joe Biden was vice president, and was telling that story. And so we start to see those things accumulate, and there are occasional moments where he's fatigued. And he will be making a statement, but he'll start to mumble a little bit. His detractors, Fox News, they will certainly play that ad infinitum, but they start to add up. And again,
Mm.
we've never been in a position where a president is trying to communicate in that way and engender enthusiasm amongst his base. And when you have polls that indicate, and both polls, by the way, said this, that a majority of Democrats don't want him to run for a second term, and those are people within your own party.
Okay.
That is really
Yeah.
problematic.
Well, who do those Democrats want to run then? What are their opinions of the vice president, Kamala Harris?
Well, that's the problem. There are a lot of people who certainly support Kamala Harris, but they don't think she could win. Her polling numbers are worse than that of President
Biden.
Biden's,
Yeah.
and all the other Democrats. There's a laundry list of people on the bench, but they don't have traction nationally. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has a lot of national attention, but he's viewed by many to be too far to the left, and so that's the conundrum.
Oh, Gavin
Plus,
Newsom's
he would
too far to the left
correct that he's too progressive. He represents a very
in
liberal state
California.
in
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
And it takes time for these candidates to develop a dialogue with the American people, and frankly, time is not on their side.
Do you know what, Conan? Over the last couple of months, me and you've spoken so many times, and our conversations are always fascinating, but they're always dominated by Trump and the Republicans, and it feels like this is the first time this poll that maybe internationally, and obviously, we're talking about what the British media has picked up compared to what is being picked up in the US, where I'm sure it's picked up far more regularly. But it feels like this is the first time that there's been a major shift where actually there is a focus on the Democrats and what will happen next year. And you just feel like at the moment, 9 weeks until Thanksgiving, if Biden did just all of a sudden, decide that actually, you know what, I'm not up for it. What I'm speculating, but I understand this is a big if. But what would happen right now if he said tomorrow, you know what, I'm not up for it? What's the process?
Well, the process is for those who want the job to immediately start filing with the secretaries of state to get on the ballot in South Carolina and in Nevada and into Michigan, in the states that have the early primaries. So it's a practical thing
Okay.
of trying so that their name will show up in these early states, and ratchet up as fast as you possibly can a donor base. Go to Joe, all the major donors in the Democratic Party, and sell yourself to them to get the seed money to get a campaign together. It would be a stretch, but it
But
could be done,
yeah.
and it might have to be done if indeed Joe Biden at the last minute did for some reason drop out.
Well, I mean, it's incredible that could happen in such a short space of time. Right, just before we let you go, let's talk about Donald Trump. Obviously, clear favourite among Republicans, despite his legal woes. He's got 91 felony accounts and separate court cases in New York, Georgia, Washington D.C. and Florida. Might be a point, Conan, where it's just easier to name the states he hasn't got cases going on in for alleged offences, including attempting to overturn the result of the 2020 election. Now, I'm sure Trump's supporters and Trump's team now will just be thinking, well, we just continue what we're doing because it seems to be resonating with the US public.
Right, and those polls that we talked about earlier, they also indicate that his numbers have gone up with each one of those indictments. So he has not been hindered by that, certainly in the popularity. And this week, there's going to be a Republican debate at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library here in Los Angeles, in California. And Donald Trump's not going to show up. He doesn't need to. He has a commanding lead in both those surveys among Republican voters. And in fact, kind of a feral genius that he is, instead, he is going to be speaking to members of the United Auto Workers Union who are on strike in Michigan, which is a battleground state. So you'll have a split screen. You'll have Donald Trump acting presidential as a former president, talking to unionized workers who are on strike, with those wannabes who want to replace him, and they're all lined up on a debate stage. So it's Donald Trump is going to be the nominee. There doesn't seem to be much of a question about that.
Yeah.
If somebody's going to take him on, they're going to need some momentum very soon, because in Iowa the first ballots are cast early next year, and if they don't beat him there, he'll be on his way.
Yeah, and that's just not going to happen, is it? It just doesn't look like it's going to happen. Anybody
Certainly
else coming in?
look.
No. Always so good to speak to you, Conan. Thank you so much for taking the time out tonight.
The pleasure's all mine.
Conan Nolan, the political correspondent for NBC. Donald Trump holds a commanding double-digit lead over President Biden before next year's election. That's according to a new ABC News and Washington Post poll that puts Trump well out in front there.